Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Planet Sky FF, the world where everything revolves around £50,000. My name's Suj,
And my name is James.
and this is the start, really, of round two of Sky FF because we've kind of done a little wrap up, and I know we're taking our end of season break next week. But to me, because we're about to go back to basics, it feels like the first episode of a new run of season two of our Sky adventure. James,
Can you start the intro again like you normally would for a Sky podcast?
uh, uh, yeah, welcome to Planet Sky FF, the world where everything revolves around £50,000. James,
And now it does. Now I'm ready. Now I'm ready to aim for it. And so should everybody who's listening, because let me tell you straight off the bat, there are going to be some new listeners who perhaps, I guess the majority probably listened to us at some point before. Let me tell you right now that if you've never played Sky before, you can win this game.
If you live in England.
No,
Great Britain. If you live in Great Britain.
If you live in Great Britain, or I think the Republic of Ireland, or Gibraltar and Malta and somewhere else randomly, some other British territory.
It feels like the Gibraltar, Malta, Jersey, these are all kind of gambling tax havens. It sounds like to me.
Suj, this is correct. Moving on.
Yeah, so Sky FF, James, you played your first season. You finished overall, what was it in the end, 170 or something? Or 200 or something?
Not right, calm down. 277th was my final overall rank.
And then we reckon there's 500,000 players in total, but obviously active teams, maybe 20,000. So it goes to show that in your first season with no experience, you can come as high as that. And we had a few patrons and correspondents and stuff that finished even higher, who I think Aaron Lager did particularly well, didn't he? And it was his first season in Sky as well.
Joe Finley Badder shared the pool for the cup. So there's a cup competition as well where the winner gets £1,000. But the problem was with the reboot of the football season, and obviously you had more games per week, there wasn't enough weeks to find a winner. So it ended up being a shared prize between 4 people who won the cup. Joe was one of them. So he shared the £1,000 prize with 3 other people.
Are you telling me that Sky don't have enough money to give them each £1,000 and they decided to split the grand 250 quid each?
Yes. Come on, there's 50 grand for the winner. I'm not...
That just feels, when we're talking about like yesterday's game with Brentford and Fulham being the richest game in football and the money spent in Sky. But you know what? It's a game at the end of the day. We're not here. We're playing to win, and the money, if the money wasn't there, we'd probably still play to win for whatever it is. So,
to be fair, he's now got 250 quid for winning a quarter final rather than £1,000 for winning the whole thing. So I think it's a decent consolation.
Yeah, you're right. You could easily have had another 2 rounds and got nothing. So cash out, take the 250 quid. Well done. So now, James, today's episode for everybody listening, we're going to run down the rules of Sky FF. Sky Fantasy Football. I mean, they don't really call it Sky FF. We call it Sky FF more than anything else, but let's keep calling it Sky FF.
It works from a hashtag perspective on, and the other reason for really doing it as well, if you start playing it, is a lot of people will get bugged out on Twitter if they see that hashtag all the time. So if people are not interested in Sky, they can obviously mute that hashtag if they want. That's one of the main reasons for using it.
So we're going to run down the differences in the rules between FPL and Sky. Working off the assumption that the majority of people do play fantasy football, official FPL, and the points and what have you, so that coming into when the game reopens and you start picking your team, you have a bit of an understanding of how to play the game. And it's going to be very quick and easy for us to explain the rules. What we want to give you is a little bit of context of the rule is different in this way, and as a result, how does it play out in reality when you're playing the game over a 45-week season or what have you? Because Sky weeks are slightly different than FPL weeks. Should we start there? I think the first thing to point out with Sky is that the weeks are fixed, right? From a deadline, every game week runs from it's a Saturday to a Friday, isn't it? a Friday to a Thursday.
Sorry, you
So the
caught me with a
deadlines,
mouthful. Friday to
yeah,
Thursday, yeah.
yeah. The deadline doesn't matter. The deadlines are all different because they're daily, but the game weeks are always a Friday to a Thursday. So double game weeks and what have you are not the same as they are in FPL because it's not dictated by game weeks. It's literally by the calendar. If it's in that Friday to Thursday block, it's a double game week, and if it's not, it's not.
Essentially, yeah, the best thing to do is to not get in the mindset of double game weeks as such. Just treat as week. I mean, there's more manipulation of fixtures, for example, rather than double game weeks. So you might have a case where someone's got 3-1 on fixtures between Sunday 1 week and Saturday 2 weekends later, where one team's playing 3 times and another team's only playing once. So get out of the mindset of thinking double game week. In terms of analysing your points over a 7-day period, there's going to be like quite a few examples where teams are playing twice, for example. So I wouldn't think of it so much from a double game week perspective. The reason it's particularly important and the reason there is the schedule of Friday to Thursday, what is locked in as the given game week is there was one rule in the sense that you can only make 5 transfers in a week.
Correct.
That's the maximum. You might think, oh, that will never happen. The guys who listened last year will know there was one occasion where I very nearly made a transfer on a Thursday when there was no games, which is not something you should really do because there were 6 I wanted to make over a 7-day period. So you have to be aware of that. That's not going to come round very often. I think that's something maybe towards the latter part of the season that might become important.
That's a fair point and a good understanding of why there's a Friday to Thursday a game week, which is that 7-day period, and it continues throughout the season as a Friday to a Thursday. So even blank game weeks exist as a Friday to a Thursday. So that's why Sky, you end up with like 42, 43 weeks, whereas FPL is 38
Correct.
game weeks because they try and align the FPL game weeks with matches, the number of matches that
in
have to play.
In an international game week, we will all score 0.
Exactly.
That's it. Essentially, they don't freeze the game. That's another 7-day period, and it will just be there's no matches. Everyone scores 0. Crack on, off you go to the next game week, for example.
So you just mentioned there the limit of transfers in a week. I think it's worth giving the bigger picture, the context of transfers for everybody as well, so they understand what you mean and why you are only allowed 5 transfers in a week. So the traditional FPL rules are actually unlimited transfers, but if you make more than one, you start taking a hit and losing points. You get 1 free transfer a week, and any more than that, you're going to have to take a hit. Let's take chips aside. With Sky, it's not like that. You get 40 transfers to use over the course of the entire season to use at your free will. Other than obviously, as we've just mentioned, you can only use a maximum of 5 in any game week, as we'll call it. So really, you could save up all of your you could go 3 or 4 or 5 weeks without making a transfer, and you've got them still in the bank, so to speak. Or you could come out of the gate really early and start making a lot of transfers early. And when we talk about the difference between match days and game weeks in a second, you'll understand why a little bit more. So transfers is a very, very interesting one because the season is long, right? We're going to be starting in September all the way through till May. How are you don't know the fixtures or the game days that fixtures are going to be played on in the second half of the season. You don't know when you're going to want to use your potential transfers. You've got injuries to worry about. I think you and I would both agree that when we this season, we approached it with caution and thought that keeping transfers in the bank for later in the season was a wise idea.
I still think that's a wise idea. It's personal, but we'll cover that more in the weeks to come. You will get a lot of people who will blow a lot of transfers early on. They are extremely unlikely to win this game. People get a bit fearful about the number of 40 transfers, or that's all I got. I mean, to equate it to a comparison to FPL for the beginners who are listening, essentially in FPL, you don't get that many transfers. As Suj just mentioned, you can obviously take hits and stuff, but think of it as 38 game weeks. You've got 2 wild cards in FPL, so that removes 2 free transfers. You've got a free hit chip, that's another one. You've got game week 1, we're obviously not making any. So actually, really, in FPL, you've got about 34 free transfers, basically. And so if you average out about 6 hits a season, this is where you're landing at about 40 transfers. People get fearful of that number. It's a decent number. It really is. So that's absolutely fine.
I don't know, James. I tell you why I think it's the reason it's harder is because you can make transfers within a game week, which we'll touch on in a second. So I don't know. 40 is more than you get in FPL. I agree. I'm in the camp that I think that 40s. It's not a huge number. This game would be so. If we had 50, for example, the scoring in this people will be looking at getting an additional 150, 200 points over a course of a season over those 10 transfers. So.
But also consider you've only got 11 problems. You haven't got 15 problems. You've only got 11 problems to worry about. There are no subs.
Okay,
in this
true.
game as well.
Yeah.
So you haven't got to worry about that guy who's sitting on the bench who's suddenly injured and he's out. You can't use him anyway.
You don't have to prep for potential use of chips like bench boost or what have you, where you might be maneuvering transfers that you don't necessarily want to make had you only worried about your starting 11, but you're worrying about your chips and what have you. And yeah, again, we're intertwining different changes here. If we hadn't made it clear, you get 11, you only pick 11 players in this game. You don't pick 15. Correct. You don't have a bench. So that's where James is alluding to. You only have 11 problems to deal with. You don't have 15 potential problems to deal with.
One key thing on the transfers is to bear in mind, basically the deadline on each day. So let's give you a hypothetical example that on a given weekend, there are only games on a Friday, Saturday and Sunday, which is quite conceivable anyway. Let's say the Friday game is at 8 p.m. commonly. Your deadline on the game day will be 8 p.m. So you will get to know the team news for the 2 teams that are playing that night, or 4 if they're all kicking off at the same time. So the idea really is that you shouldn't really, if you're looking to make a transfer for that particular game week, ideally, if you can use the team news a little bit like the FPL leaks, if you've been using them, use them. But this is part of the rules. On the next day, on the Saturday, if the first game is at 12:30 p.m., the deadline will be 12:30 p.m. You will get the teams for both of the first 2 teams that are playing that day. And from a transfer perspective, let's say you had a player that was playing on Sunday who you wanted to buy. Don't buy him till the Sunday. It's very, very simple as that.
I think it's important. Yeah, you can make transfers in the middle of a game week.
Correct.
Which you can't do in FPL. Once your team's locked, it's locked. Sky, once that match game week has started, it's not locked. Once the match day has started, which you've just, as James alluded, it's the kickoff time of the first fixture of the day, then you are locked. So you can make transfers. Now, and as James has alluded to here, wait till you know the team news. So many times we've waited until we get the City lineup before deciding which City player to bring in or what have you. But don't do it in the last 2 or 3 minutes, is my advice, because you've got a whole hour. Whereas FPL, I understand you might get a leak and you've only got 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Anytime you leave your transfer to the last 2 or 3 minutes, you're at the hands of technology. And
correct. And the app, I didn't have any bad experiences with the app from that perspective last year, but I also didn't leave anything to lastminute.com either. No. It was a case of, okay, I know the team, for example, final day of the season, game week 38, there's 11 teams to go over. If I'd have been wanting to make a transfer, I think it would have been a 15-minute thought process and get it done. Mm-hmm. That would basically be where I'd at. Similarly, of course, the benefit is if obviously you've got 2 players, say you've got 2 Manchester City players, say you've got De Bruyne and Sterling. If Sterling's not playing, you're going to stick that armband on De Bruyne, for example, aren't you? So the interaction in terms of the lateness of the game is quite important. You can, for example, if you know you don't want to make any transfers during an upcoming week, and you will have weeks where you don't make any transfers, that's a certainty. The most important day from your perspective, if you're someone who thinks, I can't be bothered with this every day, Friday is a really important day for you. Because Friday is when the game will reset each game week. So on a Friday, you can go into the game and you can set your captains for, say, like in lockdown, we had games every day. You can set your captains for the next 7 days. It's there in place. If you don't want to make any transfers, you can completely forget about it.
Let's
But
rewind just 1 second and
go on.
clarify that rule again, which people won't know and we haven't mentioned yet, James. You get to pick a captain every single day that there are matches.
Yes.
Unlike FPL, you pick one captain a week. So some of you will be thinking, why would I want to make transfers within a game week? His one big reason is that you need to pick a captain every single day that there are games. You can pick one captain, and that's a massive part of the game, and probably one of the more interesting things that differentiates between FPL and this game. And so that's why we're talking about, you want to set your captain for every single day that you've got a player on a Friday. But it's also one of the real reasons why you'd want to. So you can imagine that two of the best players in this game were Van Dijk and, let's say, Kevin De Bruyne. If Liverpool are playing on a Saturday, you can captain Van Dijk, sell him on the Sunday, and captain Kevin De Bruyne if they're playing on a Sunday. You've got two of the best players captained over a weekend. So you're really squeezing out a lot of juice if you find some of these fixture-based nuances that we'll come on to when we talk about how the fixtures work and how you can find some leverage and advantage. But daily captains is something that I fell foul of quite often last season, mainly because I was not organised enough to play Sky very well, but was very interesting. And it throws up some really good talking points and nuances in the game later on when you've got single game days. So you could end up with a Monday night game, which next season will be Aston Villa versus Fulham. Apologies, Fulham. But welcome back to the Premier League. Looking forward to interacting with Dara a little more again. And you might not own any Fulham players and you might not own any Aston Villa players. And so you'll not be able to pick a captain for that day. And then you end up in that, shall I buy one just to captain them on that day? Then you're thinking, right, now I've got to burn one of my transfers just to give myself a captain or bypass it as a fixture that you just don't care about. Yeah. So, daily captaincy is a really interesting strategy. And then, obviously, when you get days where there are some pretty dross games, what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, from that perspective there, you might be wasting two transfers because you've got to use one to get one in, and then you might want to get rid of them. So you have to be very careful with that sort of move, and that's why a lot of the planning comes around looking at fixtures further ahead as well. Because ideally, you probably don't want to get a captain in and then sell him straight away again. So there's a little bit of planning involved. I would say 90% of transfers I make would be during a given match day. And one of the terms I'll often use when I'm referring to Sky is match days, because even myself, I cannot keep a track of the game weeks because of those weeks where you have international games. They don't fall in line technically in the same way as FPL do. So I don't know if we've got match game week 4 and between game weeks 4 and 5, we've got internationals. By the time we return to match day 5 in FPL, that's game week 6 in Sky.
Yeah, they don't correlate, so it's confusing.
Correct. So I will refer to in Sky as match day 5, for example, rather than game week, the same way as the Champions League does in their group stage format, for example.
Yeah. And if you listen back to some of the early episodes of Sky FF that we did this season, you'll the number of times I'm talking about game week this and game week that, and it's not the right game week number for Sky players. Because they've gone out of sync because of these international weeks and what have you. It is quite funny. Let's touch on a very simple difference between FPL and Sky that people need to know that doesn't require a lot of explanation, but is very important. Prices in Sky don't change. Simple. It's a very simple difference. It has a very, very big impact because you can plan moves further down the line because you do know a 2 or 3 month fixture schedule quite often. You can plan your transfers weeks out without even ever having to worry about your budget. And planning is such a big part of the Sky FF game that I think if there were price rises in this game, it would have such a level of complexity that would just almost push it over the edge of this is a bit more like hard work than it is good planning and fun. You want it to be taxing on the brain, but you don't want it to end up being a chore. And I think having the prices stay fixed is actually a really important part of that. So if you're curious about, okay, hang on a second, I've got to plan all of these game days and all of these match days and all of these game weeks in the future and all of my captaincies, and then I've got price rises in between to worry about, and how am I going to use all my transfers? Scrap that price rises, because they do not exist.
Yes, you don't need to worry about it. You have 100 million budget to play with. Obviously, you have to be mindful of certain things. If you've got a player that's 11.5 and you want to get to a player that's 12 million, for example, you're probably best off leaving that 0.5 million available in the bank, or you're not going to be able to get there. And that's where part of the planning comes in, because I see it every year where people go, 0. And we see it in FPL obviously as well.
Yeah,
I'm
of course.
0.1 short, but the FPL pressure is different because you're worrying about price fluctuations as well here. If you know, for example, you want to get from player A to B on match day 3, you need to think in your mind, right, I need to keep that 0.5 million spare. Using the whole smash of 100 million straight away is not necessarily a good idea. I've certainly been in periods this year where I've had sort of 95 million or so being used and 5 million spare, because I knew that was coming in the next 2 moves, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have to do a little bit of thinking ahead, but I think as you start playing the game, you'll get used to it.
Another interesting rule in team selection, as well as price rises not increasing or decreasing, is in FPL, obviously, you are limited to 3 players per team. In Sky, you have as many as you like. Pick the whole Man City team if you could afford it. I mean, you're not going to be able to afford it, but you could, in theory, pick as many players from a single team as you want.
Yeah. I had on the final day, I think I had 4 Man City, 3 Man United, 2 Liverpool, 1 Burnley, something like that. Might have even been 4 Man United, I can't remember. But yeah, you can. We had a period last season, people remember in FPL, the double game week that Liverpool had with Wolves on the Thursday and then West Ham the following Wednesday. What happened in Sky was, actually there was periods here, and this was a big period in the game, where you could actually get 3 Liverpool games with a couple of other teams not playing at all, because they then played on the Saturday after the double game week, and a few teams didn't play till the Sunday. Burnley, Arsenal, Man City and Tottenham were the 4 teams, if I remember correctly. So you could have sold, say you had 4 Man City players in your squad, you could have sold the 4 Man City players for 4 Liverpool players, and essentially you'd have been gaining an extra, 12 fixtures.
Yeah, quite a lot.
An extra 12 fixtures of points, and then obviously decide if you want to move back or you don't. So that was an unusual one to get that sort of huge gain, and a lot of people took big advantage of it, because there were obviously gains earlier on as well, with Liverpool coming back from the international tournament that they won at in Qatar, wasn't it, in the December period. So there were a lot of teams at that time that may have had even, I certainly saw a few that had like 7, 8 Liverpool players over that period. If you can manipulate it correctly, there are huge gains to be made with that sort of thing. And that's why I talk about patience, because that 3 games there was the biggest gain period of all, with what happened in lockdown and no blanks and double game weeks essentially towards the end. That was the biggest game period of all. You don't want to get to that period and not have many transfers left.
No, exactly. A couple of quick points for the listeners, and real apologies if we're jumping from different rules to different rules, but they're intertwined. So it's difficult to not talk about one rule with the impact of other rules, which we haven't spoken about yet. So simply a couple of points, rewind and listen again. And secondly, last year we did a podcast with Paul, who's a Paul Sky player in FPL. And he was the one that really introduced us to the game. He did a very interesting thing where he took a lot of the Sky rules and forced his FPL team to play by very similar Sky rules, and ended up with a ridiculous season. What was he, 23rd or something overall?
48th in the world.
48th in the world in FPL. But one of the interesting rules in Sky that Paul transported over to FPL, and you need to be aware of in terms of your planning, is around the wild card, which is also known in Sky, it's known as the overhaul, but in FPL, obviously, you'd be a wild card. In FPL, you get 2 wild cards a season. Sky, you get 2 overhauls a season. The big difference is that in Sky, when you use them, is fixed.
Correct. So, and this is one bit of good news for the new starters is you're not going to have to think too far ahead at the beginning. If it works the same way, the first overhaul in the last 2 seasons has been after match day 4. So you
Correct.
only have to plan for the first 4 game weeks essentially, and then you have a forced overhaul where you don't have to change any of your team if you don't want to, but would recommend it. So you don't have to worry when you start. You don't have to worry about what's happening in November or anything like that. You can really hammer into teams that have got great fixtures at the start of the season. You can cover your, if we get Burnley versus Everton on a Monday night in the first 4 game days, you can make sure you stick in an asset from those 2 teams. Well, a lot of other people have just screened Richarlison, Suj. Richarlison a very important asset in the Sky game, for example.
Let's see his price first.
In future podcasts. Second highest scoring midfielder, I believe, Suj. So, yeah, Richarlison can be important in this game. And the second overhaul is normally around about February. Last year it was earlier, and it was meant to correlate around about the time of the split game week. Well, remember we had that weekend where it was 4-1 weekend, 6th weekend from the same match day. The year before it was a little bit later. It was around the same time as the Carabao Cup final. But we suspect it will be around February at some point, we think, where it gets forced.
This year unfortunately ended up being an absolute car crash because of the postponements and Corona and what have you.
Correct.
I remember because I kept so many transfers back, because we had the split game week, I was in a position where I could really steam into the matches in the first half of the split game week and make a bunch of transfers into the games in the second half. And then it ended up just going to pot because the City game, which was Arsenal, if I remember,
it wasn't
didn't
Corona.
actually happen.
Oh, no, it was your game with Manchester City.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Your game with Manchester City, which ended up going there. We didn't know when it was going to get rearranged, and it got brought right into the middle of the overhaul. And the thing is, an overhaul, you've got a 7-day period essentially where you can make unlimited transfers. They had to cut the overhaul off massively. Otherwise, everybody would have just been overhauling 11 Manchester City players, or as many as you can afford. I think we'd worked it out. It would have been 9 Man City players and 2 West Ham players. And just hammered into it and then come off them. So they had to cut the overhaul a bit shorter. But I'm sure they'll be aware of what happened last year and making sure they avoid that kind of thing this year. I would bet that it probably falls on like an international week. That's around about that time this year.
So we've touched there on your transfers. A couple of other quick things to talk about before we get into one of the really, really meaty differences in the game that's going to be probably, in my opinion, the hardest thing for people to get their head around, which is the point scoring. Because you really do have to change your mindset on point scoring, and players that you would maybe not touch in FPL suddenly become really good assets in Sky. There are players in different positions in Sky. So Salah, Mane, these guys are all forwards. Martial is a forward and so on. So some of the quirks in FPL that we think this out of position stuff is different in Sky. There's no point in getting into the real detail of who's where. But when you get into the game, you'll realize that, hang on, Raheem Sterling is a forward, and Mane and Salah and so on.
Nearly all the wide forwards will be
forwards.
The Salahs or Aubameyangs, all them. They'll almost certainly all be forwards, we think, unless there's a major change to the way they play the game.
There's very little talk about out of position stuff in the Sky game. I mean, Richarlison's one player that we just briefly talked about who might be one that you would talk about more, but generally there's less talk about OOPs and that kind of thing within the Sky game.
They do still get the odd one wrong, and obviously things can develop during the season. For example, obviously Antonio was a midfielder all season. He was a striker at the end of the season. They had Chris Basham. They had the opposite of FPL. They had Chris Basham as a midfielder,
which nobody mentioned. Was a midfielder,
which nobody mentioned all season in Sky because it was irrelevant. But they have been known to make the odd mistake as well, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do with one of the newly promoted clubs. So it's worth keeping an eye on.
It just feels like there's quite often less advantage to be gained from these OOPs in Sky potentially.
Yes. I would say so.
And the pricing, we've talked about the pricing being fixed for the entire season. Excuse me there, but also the prices of players and the difference between the prices of the players is very different to what you would expect in regular FPL. So,
you got an alarm going off, mate.
So Kevin De Bruyne is at 11.2 million, to give you an example. Virgil van Dijk is 10.6. So the difference between a VVD and a Kevin De Bruyne, if you saw those kind of differentials,
they ain't going to be those prices next year, mate.
No, we've only got last year's prices to work off. If you saw that kind of differential in FPL, you would be like, what the hell is this? There can't be that small a difference between those two guys' prices, even if you did scale them down. What's going on here? Like an Andy Robertson, 10.2 million. Funnily, Andy Robertson was more expensive in Sky than Trent Alexander-Arnold this season.
Yeah, but that's because the year before, Andy Robertson well outperformed Trent. So obviously in FPL they started.
He did an FPL as well last year.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. So in 18-19, yes, Robertson outperformed Trent. So I mean, next year in Sky, Trent will be more expensive. I'm certain Trent will have a major hike.
Yeah, but it's worth pointing out that Trent didn't outscore VVD.
No. So this is a great example. I think we're jumping one a little bit because I just want to kind of determine on formation here.
Yep.
And it is important to say, when you transfer out, for example, a midfielder, you don't necessarily have to replace with a midfielder. Because you've only got 11 players, you can maneuver within formation. So, for example, that occasion where I was talking about, I had lots of money left in the bank. I actually made a transfer from s.2 after his red card against Bournemouth directly to Danny Ings and shifted the formation. Because I was playing 4-4-2. For example, that one transfer then has shifted me directly to a 3-4-3 formation. So you can manipulate between formations. The one note on formations, which is different to FPL, is there is only one system you can play if you are using 5 at the back, and that's 5-3-2. So you can't use 5-2-3, you can't use 5-4-1 either unless they change the rules. Last season, the only system you could play with 5 at the back was 5-3-2. Otherwise, the other regular formations that you'd use in FPL are good to go, basically.
You need to keep a minimum of 3 defenders. So 3-4-3 is viable.
Correct. Yeah.
And
minimum of 3 defenders. You can play 4-5-1 still. That's okay. So it's just a case you can't play 5-4-1 or 5-2-3. Otherwise, formation-wise, it works the same as FPL.
Yeah. Minimum of 3 defenders, minimum of 3 midfielders. Just if you work off that assumption, then the rest is fine. But you can maneuver your 11 quite a lot throughout the season. So play a lot more different formations than maybe you might in FPL. Let's talk about fixtures and this concept of 2-for-1s, 3-for-1s, that kind of thing, so that people understand what we mean when we talk about 2-for-1s and 3-for-1s, because we'll talk about that quite often. I think, excuse me, especially in the early part of the season, when we did the Sky FF podcast and we asked people for questions, one of the most common questions was, have you seen any good 2-for-1s, or have you seen any good 3-for-1s that we can jump?
What we're referring to there, and I'll break this down kind of simply if I can. Let's say you've got 3 match days in a period between one weekend and the next weekend. So you've got weekend fixture, you've got a full set midweek fixtures. One of the things we're referring to here is where you can make the gains to kind of jump in and then jump back off towards the same player. So let's just take simple examples of Manchester City and Liverpool. Let's say Liverpool are playing on the Saturday, the Wednesday, and then the Sunday. And Manchester City are playing on the Sunday, the Wednesday, and the Saturday. Now, between Liverpool's first fixture and their last fixture of those 3 games, they play once in the middle. Manchester City play 3 times in between those first and last Liverpool fixtures.
Right.
And the idea being then is you can jump into Manchester City, you will lose 1 Liverpool fixture, but you've now got 3 Manchester City fixtures, for example. And this is obviously particularly good. Let's say that midweek fixture for Liverpool was, I don't know, a difficult one against Manchester United, for example. Then it really does look like a massive game where you go, do you know what? I'm going without them this week. I'm going to power into Manchester City. Now, the problem with Manchester City, of course, is the rotation headache. Yes. Actually, if it flips the other way, it looks a lot more solid with Liverpool, doesn't it? For example,
Yes.
and these are the decisions you have to weigh up during the season. But that's essentially what we're referring to is
And you can
gains.
get these gains from all the like. It might feel like you want to find these 3-for-1s and 2-for-1s just from the big teams, but you can get them throughout the league. And like Burnley defensive sometimes might have 2 or 3 really good fixtures, and what have you. One of the stats that we don't have from Sky, but I'd love to know, is in and amongst the top 100, let's say, for example, how many fixtures their team actually played. Do you know what I mean? So
Yep.
how many times did you go for a 3-for-1s and 2-for-1s? Because if you really weigh it up over the season and you're really efficient with it, you could end up with maybe 40 extra games out of players. And if you're thinking
Easy.
about, yeah, if you
You
say,
should be getting that.
if you then look at an average of say 4 points per player, I mean 40, but that's 160 points. Suddenly we're talking big gains from being 5,000 to top 1,000 and that kind of thing. So unfortunately, we don't have that data because I think it'd be a little bit complicated to try and figure out how many match days did someone actually have over the course of a season from all of their players and all of their transfers. But it wouldn't surprise me if the teams that are further up the top have taken the best advantage of the 3-for-1s, and also avoided the 2-for-1s and 3-for-1s when they've not been worth it as well. There's just as much chance that you get sucked into thinking, do you know what? West Ham have got a 3-for-1 over City. I'm going to go and get Antonio. He's injured for 2 games or whatever. So knowing when to say no is just as important as knowing when to go into these 2-for-1s or 3-for-1s. And it all then feeds back into planning and having a view of whether you use a spreadsheet or what have you, having a view of like 2 or 3 weeks where all the game days are laid out, because then you can easily see and circle, hang on a second, I can jump off here, jump on here, and in the middle, those guys have got 3 fixtures or 4 fixtures or what have you. And the Europa League teams works quite well because quite often they'll play on a Sunday after a Saturday. So Wolves were really good for jump on, jump offs and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, as you would look at it now, Kane, Vardy, Aubameyang, if you just break it like that, probably in sort of the October, November period, you're almost definitely going to want one of these 3 players, for example, to cover you the captaincies on a number of Sundays if Tottenham make it through to the Europa League group stage, for example. They're going to have a lot of Sunday games. Having one of them is probably going to cover you off. I would suggest, if you ask me right now, the best of choice of those, by the way, would be Aubameyang, but we'll talk about that nearer the time. Because that was a question we got last week, Suj, which you didn't ask me. So I thought I'd
it
answer
was
it now.
as well, actually, but it felt premature. It was Gary, wasn't it? Is my cat playing was asking about that. I did see it felt very, 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 very premature. But now that we know that Arsenal are in the Europa League, yeah.
Should we look at the scoring a little bit?
Yes. So the last and final piece of the jigsaw to get your head around, if transfers, pricing, game days, captaincy, and so on isn't enough to worry about, the scoring is different, completely different. I think we did the maths.
I don't know about
didn't we?
completely. It's quite similar to FPL.
Well, it's bigger. So you ended up with what we did the maths. Was it 50% more points in Sky than FPL, something like that?
You're not quite that much, but yeah, give or take, quite close.
It's a lot
about
more.
40%, I think.
More. So I mean, part of that is down to the fact that we have more match days and more captaincies, but part of that is also down to one of the biggest differences, which is what in FPL you would call tier points. But in FPL you'd call bonus points, BPS. In Sky are called tier points. Before we get into the points, which is really the last big piece of the jigsaw, one other thing to chuck in. We mentioned the overhaul versus wildcards. And this is a very simple, easy difference. There are no other chips in Sky.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. No,
simple.
No,
that's it. There's nothing more to add to that. Then there are no other chips to worry about and play. Which is probably a good thing because there's enough nuance in the game with other things like the 3-for-1s and 2-for-1s that almost feel like your little chips to get advantage anyway.
The gaining of transfers is particularly important. If you're just constantly making transfers every Saturday between 2 players that are always playing on a Saturday, you're not going to make any gains. You're not going to make ground because other people are taking advantage and giving their players extra games, extra captaincies, etc. In terms of scoring, just a few different things. Generally, you get more points for a goal. So goalkeepers and defenders get 7 points, midfielders 6 points for a goal, and a goal scored by a striker is 5 points.
It's an extra point in every position, basically.
You also don't have to worry about the 60-minute rule in terms of your starters, because if your player starts and he comes off injured after 2 minutes, you will still get 2 points rather than 1. You get 1 point for a substitute appearance, irrespective of what minute that is. It's still 3 points for an assist. Clean sheets are worth 5 points rather than 4 points. However, to a goalkeeper, and this might change, I have a feeling, by the way, they get 7 points for a goalkeeper clean sheet. Goalkeepers also get 5 points for a penalty save. And as we learned last season, they don't even need to save it. If the penalty is missed, the goalkeeper will be awarded the penalty save points, irrespective of whether he touches the ball or not. So if someone hits the post or the bar or puts it over, whatever, the goalkeeper will be awarded the points as if it's a save.
That's a big difference there in goalkeeper points.
You can't prepare for it as such.
No, you can't. But the clean sheet, 7 points for a clean sheet. Once you factor in the 2 points, like a clean sheet for a goalkeeper, suddenly up to 9 points. And we talk about the tier points and other stuff as well.
Well, the example I'll give you is there was a game between Sheffield United and Aston Villa in the autumn period last year, where Jack Grealish hit the crossbar from a penalty. Sheffield United won 2-0. Dean Henderson returned a 14-pointer. I think he made 2 saves in the game.
Yeah.
Wow.
The number of times I've looked at my team and a goalkeeper's picked up a double-digit return. I'm like, for what? Like, it's a clean sheet and they've done nothing all game. Why are they on 11, 12 points?
Even Edison is capable of getting 11 pointers, and we'll come on to this in a little bit. You get -1 for every 2 goals. Every goal conceded +2. Yep. So if you concede 4, I think that's going to put you on a 0, for example. If you concede 6, you're going to be on a -2.
That's the same as FPL, right? A -point for every 2
own goals are -2, yellow cards -1, red cards are -3. You get 3 points as well for the Man of the Match award. Now, Man of the Match awards
you're opening a can of worms.
Yes, are for the regular players are a topic of concern, shall we say. A lot of the Sky players would like the Man of the Match award scrapped, because quite often when there is, let's say, room of doubt between who should be given the Man of the Match, we suspect quite a lot of the time it's just given to the player that's the most owned. But there are certain players, if you target them correctly, can give you good returns because they will regularly hit Man of the Match. The best example of this last year was Adama Traore of Wolves, who had a unbelievable period over the winter where it felt like he was getting Man of the Match every other week at worst case.
He got the most Man of the Match awards.
He had the most,
tied with Kevin De Bruyne. 10 Man of the Match awards over a season, 30 points. It's a lot.
Good players to think of from this perspective, not so much Traore, but I'll give you 2 different examples. If Jack Grealish is doing well for Aston Villa, he's obviously a player that's liable to win Man of the Matches if he stays with them. Another good one.
9 times he won Man of the Match last season.
One to watch out for this year, which I think could be interesting, is Alan St. Maximin. Very good in periods that I watched him after the lockdown. And again, if Newcastle do better than expected, he's going to pick up a lot of Man of the Match awards, for example. So you need to be aware of these guys. You might think, all right, shit team, etc. But essentially, if St. Maximin gets you a Man of the Match award, even if he doesn't get an attack in return, he's hitting 5 points. It's the same as getting an assist with no bonus in FPL, basically.
Yeah.
Now, the bonus tiers themselves, there are 2 tiers of bonus, and there are 4 areas where you can hit tiers, which are worth extra points to you, and I'll explain them to you. So
and before you do, James, can I just jump in with one nuance? So in Sky, in FPL, it's 3-2-1 is your bonus points, but it's on the BPS system, and the top player gets 3-2-1. We know how that works.
Yeah.
In Sky, every single player on your team could, or in a match, could end up with these tier points, as we call them, because it's not based on a ranking model. It's basically, if that player does that, they get that. Yeah. So BPS is much more important, because you could have, you see games where someone will score 2 or 3 goals and they don't get BPS. Like Salah is notorious for doing well. A goal and assist, no BPS. it would just never happen in Sky because it's not based on a ranking system. It's literally if your player does what needs to be done to achieve the BPS, the tier point, they get them.
And there are 4 areas it's quite straightforward to understand: saves, tackles, passes, shots on target. These are where you can pick up the additional points. So there are tiers 1 and 2. And again, look, they might maneuver this slightly before the new season, but we're just going to define for you how it worked last season. So if a goalkeeper makes 3 saves, he hits tier 1 and gains 2 additional points. If he makes 5 saves, he hits tier 2, gets 3 additional points. You cannot get both. So if a goalkeeper makes 4 saves, he's on tier 1. If he makes 5 saves, he's on tier 2. You can't get both. It would be one or the other. So 3 or 4 saves would be tier 1 for 2 additional points. 5 saves would be tier 2, 3 points. Tackles. 3 tackles won in a match is tier 1. You get 2 points. 4 tackles will get you tier 2. Ricardo Pereira is an exceptional player when it comes to winning tackles. I think he finished second highest for tackles won last season, even though he missed from February onwards or something.
A quarter of the season.
He is going to have a massive price hike in Sky, I should imagine, in spite of not play. I think he finished really high. He certainly would have finished with an excess of 200 points if he'd been fit the whole season, I would say. Mm-hmm. Put it this way, a lot of the season he was pushing Trent and Robertson in terms of points in Sky. Now, just to be clear in terms of tackles, 1, it has to be a tackle 1 that returns possession. So, for example, if Pereira slides in for a slide tackle and wins it cleanly, but the ball goes out for a throw-in, he won't win a tackle. He doesn't win a tackle. If he wins the tackle cleanly, but it goes straight to an opponent, same thing. Possession must be won from that tackle, be it goes to a teammate or you win it cleanly and then you get up and you take the ball away. That would be defined. Yep. There was an incident in a game at Southampton where us newbies last year thought Suj hit tier 2 tackles in the space of about 3 seconds because he went in for 3 crunching tackles and he won all of them. But obviously in each case, he kept losing the bloody ball, didn't he?
Yeah.
So he didn't actually get anything for them. In terms of passes, to hit tier 1, which is 2 bonus points, you have to complete 60 passes in a match. For tier 2, you have to make 70 passes in a match. Will get you 3 additional points. Virgil van Dijk, Aymeric Laporte, these guys who play centre half, who are very capable of hitting extremely high numbers.
Let me give you an idea of the top 6 or 7, right? And you'll notice a trend here.
Yeah,
Van Dijk, Fernandinho, Rodri, Gomez, Jorginho, Zuma, Otamendi, Gundogan, Soyuncu, Kyle Walker, Johnny Evans. All defenders or holding midfield players. Correct. All of them. Without fail, all of them were the ones that got the most tier 2 passes. And Van Dijk, so Fernandinho, Rodri were second with 14 times they picked up tier 2 passing. Yeah. And Gomez and Jorginho were third with 12 times. How many times do you think Van Dijk picked it up?
It was 21 or something.
21 times. Yeah. So he's more than 50% more than the next 2 in Fernandinho and Rodri. This is why Van Dijk is the most expensive defender in the game, because he's knocking the ball around for fun at the back there for Liverpool, and that's why they're racking them up. Teams that keep the possession well, City. I don't know how Chelsea have crept in with Zuma and Jorginho, but City, Liverpool, and Leicester, their defenders have racked up these passing points.
It's very easy in a narrow Liverpool win for Virgil van Dijk to end up on 20 points without captaincy. So he's a great player to captain generally, because a Liverpool clean sheet he's quite often going to mean 20 points for you, 10 times 2. You get the 5 for the clean sheet, 2 for the appearance, and the 3 for passing 70 plus passes, right? You throw in the potential. You throw in exactly the potential of the clean sheet. Say the potential of him scoring
Mm-hmm.
And then he potentially hits man of the match if he scores as well, which is
Yep.
a couple of occasions where he scored this season.
Yep.
Suddenly that's 20 points times 2 is 40.
You
It
never know.
becomes
He might
massive.
he might need to make a couple of tackles once in a blue moon. He might do that as well, and you can see why. Yeah, so the point scoring is much more focused around the all round game of the players.
Was you take a different example, so Rodri near enough, if he starts at Manchester City, near enough starts on 5 points. And again, think of it, that's like you're getting an FPL assist every week. So I think these guys, Rodri, Jorginho, I think they were a bit underplayed last year. But I mean, price-wise, if you can get them in and leave them in, they're going to put up a basic rate for you every single week.
Yeah,
the problem particularly with, say, Rodri is you want to fire the captaincy on De Bruyne or something else. But De Bruyne's a great example, right? So to give you the difference in FPL and Sky scoring from De Bruyne and Van Dijk last year, and De Bruyne was the top scorer in both. De Bruyne scored 251 FPL points, scored 273 Sky points. It's 22 extra points. De Bruyne doesn't hit the tiers very often. He sometimes hits passing, sometimes hits shots. He has very occasionally hit tackles as well. He doesn't often hit the tiers, obviously, because he's such a beast. He doesn't actually need to so much. He can still hit all the points. And obviously, De Bruyne will get a lot of man of matches as well, obviously. But Van Dijk scored, I think Van Dijk was about the 10th or 11th highest scoring FPL player, 178 FPL points. In Sky, Van Dijk scored 268 points. So 90 points difference.
Correct.
It's more than 50% on top of his FPL total is what he scored in Sky. So certain players don't need the tiering, like De Bruyne. Certain players like Van Dijk, it makes them a huge potential asset in Sky as opposed to FPL. Van Dijk was the highest scoring Liverpool player in the game. He was the second highest point scorer in the whole of the Sky game behind De Bruyne. He only finished 5 points behind De Bruyne.
To just wrap up the shot tiers, if you don't mind, and then I'll give you a couple of nuances on the tier points. On that.
So shot tiers, I've just lost the app now. My Wi-Fi.
Okay.
You do it.
Oh, I've only got the players in front of me.
I'll
let
get
me
it
just
up.
pull
Hold
up
on.
the shot tiers. One thing I would you have a.
So it's two shots
2.
on target for additional 2 points, and 3 shots on target for for additional 3 points, and tier 2 for 3 shots on target. If your player scores twice in a game, you've got to hit 2 bonus points as well.
Because they've got 2 shots on target.
Because they've got 2 shots on target and scored twice, right? So you get 5 points, say for a striker, 5 points, say Aubameyang scores twice, for example. You got 5 points twice. That's 10 points. You're now hitting 2 bonus points. It's 12 points. You got 2 for the starting. That's 14. And chances are, if you score twice, it's probably man of the match as well. Throw in another 3, 17-point captaincy. You've now got 34 points.
I would say that on the tier points, you can agree or disagree with me, James. I think the shot tiers are the least interesting for a couple of reasons. They don't get hit as often. So if you look at the passing tier 2, you're talking about some of these guys are doing it 14, 15, 20 times a season. Shot tier 2, Mohamed Salah got it the most, and that was only 7 times over the course of an entire season. And shot tier 1 was Salah, Aubameyang, and Son, and that only happened 10 times over a season. So shot tiers are hit much less than passing tiers and sometimes tackle tiers as well. And the other interesting thing to note on save tiers for goalkeepers is I think they're a little bit less relevant as well from picking your goalkeeper, because if you look at the goalkeeper that got the most tier 1 or tier 2 save tiers, you're looking at Dubravka, Tim Krul did particularly well, or Ramsdale. They didn't get any clean sheets. And the 7 points for a clean sheet far outweighs the 2 or 3 points you're picking up for save tiers. Whereas a Dean Henderson, for example, he didn't do as well on the save tier points necessarily. Save tier 1, he did 15 times, but he very rarely hit save tier 2. But the clean sheets really racked up for him, for example, compared to the others. So save tiers almost feel like something where I'm going to find the goalkeeper that consistently gets tier 1s on top of his clean sheet points. And shot tiers, I'm happy with the striker that picks up shot tier 1 on top of goals. Whereas for the midfielders and the defenders, for the tackle and passing tiers, I want someone that's racking up tier 2 quite regularly. I don't know if you kind of agree with
Yeah, I
that a little bit.
understand that. I think, for example, if Pope at Burnley and McCarthy at Southampton were the same price next year, you would go for Pope, because although many of us might think Southampton could well step up and improve next year, at the moment there were still serious trust issues with them defensively. Whereas with Burnley, Sheffield United, these teams, you know what, I can leave him. And the other great thing about picking a goalkeeper in this position from these sort of clubs as well, when they have that awful Monday night fixture against Crystal Palace, for example, just put the armband on them as well and forget about it. So goalkeepers is one where you're probably really looking to leave it. But like I identified after the restart that it was a massive gain to be made from going from Dean Henderson to Nick Pope. In fact, when we restarted, I said it was the one transfer I was certain to make, because it was massive gain to be made on Pope fixtures and on captaincy as well, because he had a captaincy coming up with Crystal Palace on the Monday night game. And unfortunately as well, we had the Norwich game as well. So Pope was a great asset to hold towards the end of last season. So you can move between them, but generally you want to get one in there that's extremely reliable. Now, you might decide, we all thought this time last year that it was go Ederson or Alisson, go very big. Now, I think the group think will generally be lean towards these sort of Henderson and Popes next year, depending on how big a rise they have in price. But it might be, say, for Alisson, you know, it might come back round, Suj. It's easy to forget that
he missed so much of the
football
season
last
with
season.
When Adrian was in goal, and that's
And
when Liverpool leaked so many
Manchester
ones.
City have been sloppy, right? We expect them to improve as a team next year in terms of their points in the league table, for example. Ederson picked up 11 points on the final day of the season against Norwich. So he is capable, because they actually have the sloppy moments, he is capable of actually making save bonus as well, Ederson. So you look at that, Ederson at home to Norwich, 11 points. It's laughable, but it's gettable. So actually selecting the right goalkeeper on this is actually really important. You don't want a goalkeeper who's conceding goals every game week.
No, you don't. Definitely not. And so that's a quick rundown on the points as well. But I feel like we've just bombarded you with 45 minutes of, an hour of information. I thought we'd be talking for 45 minutes, and we've done what we do, James.
We go on a bit too much. We'll probably leave it there then and not.
Yeah.
But the idea behind this podcast was essentially for the new beginners. Like, I wouldn't say go back and listen to it again tomorrow, but maybe go back and listen to it again in a couple of weeks if you're thinking of starting the game. I think
there's no rush. We got plenty of time before the first week.
The one thing that really puts people off is the idea of, oh no, I've got captains every game. Don't fear it. Embrace it would be my advice.
Agree.
And
you can set the whole week's captains up in one go if you
yes,
you're going to
which
be
is why
your
Friday is the key day. And the best advice I can give you as well is you do need to be making transfers actively within match days to gain advantage on fixtures, as we covered. But if you've got a week where you're flying abroad for a week and you're like, I can't have access to this, etc., set it on a Friday, you'll be fine. Or if you're going away for 2 weeks, you need to get your fucking mate to do something for you.
Yeah, or VPNs, virtual private network, that makes it look like you're browsing from the UK. If there's any VPN companies out there that want to sponsor the show so that we can give you a plug, you know.
On the VPNs, cheap. If you've made it this far through the podcast, yeah, there are ways of manipulating being able to play in other countries. But yeah, good luck trying to claim the 50,000 prize if you win it overall.
Yeah.
The prizes, by the way, because we didn't actually.
James, I'll tell you what. I've got about 8 to 9 email addresses, and I'm only going to use one of them for Sky. So if anybody wants to use my other 7 email, I'm going to take 25% of your winnings. Should you win? Should you want to use one of my email addresses? There we go. 25%. I
think you probably need to give proof of where you live.
12.5 grand. They do it in my name. They just have the login and manage the team. I want that 12.5 grand, James. It's worth it. Just let me use my email.
This will be the final year of Planet FPL and Planet Sky FF, because this time next year, Suj,
I'll be in jail.
We'll be in jail. The prize for finishing first in Sky is £50,000 cash. Second place is £5,000 cash. Third place is £1,000 cash. Fourth and fifth place get a choice of consoles. There are also Manager of the Month awards, which get a choice of console as well, and there is a knockout cup, which I've got some tactics for that, which I'll explain as and when it comes around. But yeah, look, there's money to be won here. The majority of you listening for the first time, you think, I love FPL. I wish FPL had a 50,000 prize at the end of it. This does, and essentially, it's not difficult. If you're engaged into the game, you will finish in the top 1,000. It's very, very capable. It's not to say you're a bad player if you don't, but me and Suj sat here last year and got told that top 100 was an excellent finish, the equivalent of the top 10K in FPL, if you will. And we fell about laughing. We're like, shut up. What are you talking about? But actually, like for myself, there's a bit of regret of not even getting there. So if you're engaged in the game, if you like your strategy and your planning, you will hit the ground running on this game. And I genuinely, a first-time player can win this game. I'm not joking.
Indeed. If you do have any questions around Sky FF, keep them stored up. We're going to be coming at you with much more Sky FF content. Nothing next week while we take a break. And then we'll be starting in the planning for next season. As always, wherever you're listening to the podcast, if you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. If you're on YouTube, hit the notification bell and like the video and put something in the comments and all of that other good stuff. Just to let you know, we also do run a Patreon. So patreon.com/Planet FPL. Today, we're going to be doing a look at Sky FF from a dead team point of view. Could you set up an 11, make 0 transfers, and still win the entire thing, which is fascinating. James has done a good rundown on some numbers for that.
He thinks so. He doesn't know what I've done yet.
No, well, we'll see. We also put out exclusive content for the patrons every single day, including quizzes and all of that kind of stuff as well. So if you're interested in more content from James and I, then do jump on that. It's just patreon.com, as I said, /Planet FPL.
Wednesdays will be Planet Sky FF. Every Wednesday we will do a Sky pod, except as Suj said, obviously next week because we will take a break. But yeah, every Wednesday, just shout out as well to other contributors. Obviously, Joe and Luke from Scout do great videos, and the Hub boys, Andrew Ferguson, Dan Cox, Paul McNulty, do a brilliant Hub podcast, which is normally on a Sunday night. You can normally view that live on YouTube and enter their chat, or you can listen to it as a podcast afterwards. And I'm sure there'll be more up and coming contributors to Sky. I know the Wolfpack guys are really looking to get involved this year. Our friend Rob Pick's going to be doing articles for them on Sky. So it's a growing game. I suspect in 10 years, this will be really difficult to win. It's not necessarily at the moment.
No. Other than that, as always, guys, stay safe. Ciao for now.
Thank you, everyone. Cue music, please, man, child.